Hey guys, so we have been making content for about a year now, and a lot of you have seen most of our shorts, but we thought this would be a good opportunity to get to know a little bit about us, why we do jiu-jitsu, why jiu-jitsu is our life, and just answer any questions that you may have on the people behind the content. So I'll start. My name is Stephanie Trevino, and I've been training jiu-jitsu for 9 years.
My name is Robert Ezel. I've been training jiu-jitsu for about 15 years now.
So I guess we'll start with the first question. I'll go ahead and ask you in an interview format. But tell them why you started jiu-jitsu and why you chose this as kind of like a life plan.
Definitely didn't choose it as a life plan. More just happenstance. As far as starting jiu-jitsu, so I got into martial arts 2008, 2009, so I was 18, 19, fresh out of high school. So I used to watch UFC back in the day of Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, a lot of the old school guys. So I used to go over to a high school friend's house. His dad would order and we would watch fights on the weekends. And again, we were fresh out of high school. We were always like, man, we want to learn this. Like, it'd be so cool to learn how to punch, kick, wrestling, grappling, all that stuff. So I had a friend who, my buddy, his dad actually ordered the fights. He signed up for a jiu-jitsu school first. And then I found a business card at a supplement shop where I was buying protein at for Muay Thai. I was like, oh, cool. Like, my buddy started it, kind of gave me that push that I needed to go. So I went into this Muay Thai school. Well, luckily for me, like, it was only the instructor and it wasn't very many people, other students. So the first maybe 3-6 months, I got a lot of like one-on-one, and maybe it's one of the person in the class attention. Strictly Muay Thai, learned everything, punches, kick, knees, elbows, clinch, all that fun stuff. Did that for maybe a year or more before I dabbled a little bit in grappling. Just with my schedule, I didn't have as much time for jiu-jitsu. Like, I had my schedule, I was going to school part-time, I was working part-time, and kind of training martial arts part-time, right? So I would, once I had more time, I started dedicating more time to grappling. And then I decided that I wanted to do MMA. So I really had to start picking up the grappling. And I think that was 2009 when I really started doing jiu-jitsu 3 days a week. And just stuck with it ever since. So now we're at 2022. So had time off for injuries, opened a few businesses here and there, but been training, I would say, consistently since 2009. How about yourself? How'd you get into martial arts or jiu-jitsu in particular?
I guess, like, for me, martial arts was always one of those things that really, it fascinated me. And when I was younger, I really wanted to do martial arts, but I grew up in kind of a household where we didn't have a lot of extra fun, so doing anything extracurricular like that was just completely out of the question. So when I had my son, I knew that I wanted him to train some kind of martial arts. And where I lived, there was actually not any jiu-jitsu schools, but there was taekwondo schools. So I put him in taekwondo for a couple of years. He did that. And then when I moved to Katy, I found, a jiu-jitsu school. I enrolled him. He actually went all the way up until his teens, where he got too big and they were like, well, he has to start coming to the adult classes. And I said, you know what? I'm already here. I mean, I have to bring him every day. I have to sit here while he's in class. I might as well start too. So that was like 2014, and I started jiu-jitsu, and I kind of never looked back. I did other things during that time. I was doing CrossFit, I was doing bodybuilding, and I would say, like, when I started jiu-jitsu, it was never one of those things where I said, this is going to be my life, and this is going to be the thing that I do, for the rest of my life. It was just one of those things where it was fun to learn. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the physicality of it. I also enjoyed, the learning process of it. There's just so much to learn in jiu-jitsu. It's like you've never learned it all, and that was one of the things that really drew me to it. So even when my son quit jiu-jitsu, I was still going. My daughter did it, and now it's like just kind of become my life. And I will say, like, jiu-jitsu is the one thing that I've done, like, in kind of like a sports arena, that I can happily say, like, this is my life. Like, that my life is centered around jiu-jitsu. I'll be doing it for the rest of my life. it's just one of those things where like I'm so happy with it, and I'm so happy that I found it. And for me, empowering other women to do jiu-jitsu is it really gives my life a purpose.
Yeah, I would say so. It definitely gives your life a purpose. And I remember times being at like before even like teaching full time, just being at certain events and certain competitions, and sometimes not even where I was competing, but I just remember like being in these places and just being like thinking to myself like, this is exactly where I should be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like being at these cool events, having these experiences, being able to compete, and meeting all kinds of, you know, really cool people, and developing really long-lasting friendships. I just remember like kind of like stopping to smell the roses in a sense in these certain situations where I would think like, man, this is exactly where I should be. Like this is like, this makes me happy. This makes me content. And so yeah, there was plenty of times where I thought that, you know, and again, just whatever it may be an event like on an invitational, or it may have been like a you know, a seminar, or it may have been a competition of my own. Like I was just like, man, this is exactly where I want to be, and this is exactly what I want to be doing with my life. So yeah, it always felt that way. But there was, you know, it took a while for me to realize like I want to do this full time. You know, like I think I started coaching at blue belt, you know, which is not so common nowadays. I mean, maybe 10 years ago it was.
Yeah.
So, and even 10 years ago, it was still looked upon like, oh, you're just a blue belt, you shouldn't be coaching. You know, I was a little longer in the tooth as a blue belt. You know, been a white belt, I think for like 3 years, a blue belt. I think it was over 2 or 3 years. But I remember asking my coach when I got offered my first coaching gig, I got offered at a CrossFit gym. 2 of my friends that I went to high school with, and I remember asking my coach because I wanted to do it, and I felt like I had a knack for kind of helping my teammates and things like that. I remember asking my coach if I could do it, and he was totally fine with it, which is, I was kind of nervous just asking him because he was an old school Brazilian. He was kind of intimidating, so I was nervous and kind of scared that he was going to get mad at me for asking a coach as a blue belt, but he didn't. So I took that job, and really even at blue belt, it took me a while to get confident in my coaching, because it wasn't until like getting my purple belt I'm like, all right, I'm legit now, or more legit. You know, it was one of those things. It was like, I don't know if it was just like culture or people, you know, just looking at a certain way of blue belts coaching. When I got my purple belt, I was like, all right, now I can like have more confidence in my ability to instruct, which is silly. It's just, you know, from one day you're blue belt, the next day you're purple. It's really just the color that changed around your waist, but it did give me that little bit of like more confidence to be like, all right, you can teach at a higher level.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like coaching, it's one of those things where like if you have this knack to connect with people, and you have this ability to like explain things to people in a way they understand, the subject matter isn't as important. I mean, you could you know, take something, if you can take something really complicated and simplify it in a way that people understand, you know, that's what makes like a really good coach. And the technical skill and the abilities, those come, you know, with time. But if you can fine tune like your coaching skills, like those are priceless. Those are things that you can use, you know, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, definitely. And it was something I'd never done before. You know, I would coach in anything. I mean, I've always been an athlete. Did track, did football my whole life, but getting into like a coaching job, it was totally new to me. You know, I knew the techniques, I knew what I was teaching, but it's very much a trial and error process. And even today, like as a black belt, like there's some things like you try and teach, or you try and show a certain way, and it doesn't always work. And sometimes you find things that work better than others, and that's the fun part about it. Just like with learning jiu-jitsu, it's the same thing kind of with teaching. Like you evolve and you learn the ways to do things better, learn you know, certain ways that you can kind of connect with particular people, because not everyone learns the same, and not everyone body's type is the same. And I think at first when you start coaching, you kind of show like what you do best and what you know best, and then eventually you're able to branch outside of that and show people like that don't have the same body structure as you, the same ability, and different ways of doing a certain technique.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we'll talk about now is like when it comes to coaching, we get a lot of students that, that is their ultimate goal. They want to coach jiu-jitsu, and we always encourage that. For me, I think kind of one of the things that makes you successful at something that you do is if you're able to instill that passion in other people where they can go off and do that. So, making new jiu-jitsu coaches and new like upper belts and professors, that's always kind of like the ultimate goal. When it comes to coaching, the things that you have to realize is everybody learns differently. And I think if you can really fine tune, this is the way I learn and this is the way I teach, but let me learn the other ways that people learn so that I can help them. You're gonna have people that come in through your doors that have never worked out or don't know how to move their body. Coaching kids is actually a great, starter for what it's like to coach an adult that has never, worked out before. Because kids don't know right from left. They don't know put your foot here, put your right, leg there. And so you have to like sometimes physically move them. And when you learn that about children, it also translates into adults. And then the thing is, to always be honest and accept responsibility. Like while you're teaching, you don't know everything, and you're not supposed to. And when you can translate that to your students, they're gonna respect you, and they're just gonna feel more connected. I've had coaches before, not so much in jiu-jitsu, but other sports that are like, I know everything. They act like they know everything, and they don't like being questioned. They don't like when you're like, well, what about this? And it really translates over to, the students. It makes, you feel kind of dumb for even asking, or it makes you feel, like, wow, maybe I'm stupid because I shouldn't have even asked that question. Or when you think about like coaches for the future, what are some pointers or tips that you can give them?
I think like from what you're saying, I was thinking like humility, like being able to know being able to be comfortable with not knowing everything.
Yeah.
And it's just impossible to know everything, and sometimes you might not have an answer right there on the spot, and you have to be okay with that. And it's just like, even at black belt, like you think as you're coming up, like, oh, once you get to black belt, you just know everything, right? You just will, because you're black belt.
Magic.
Right? Yeah, black belt magic. But you don't, and that's the thing. It's okay to not always know everything, right? Or maybe they have a question. You know what? I need to look at that. Or maybe I need to ask somebody, or maybe my instructor, or someone I know that delves into that area better than I do, because there's so many different areas of jiu-jitsu, whether it be wrestling, judo, leg locks, chokes, different things like that. But also, like you said, also being able to own up to a mistake. Mm-hmm. Like if you miss a detail or miss a step, or I should have emphasized on XYZ. That happens, and I think as long as you're honest and you tell your students, like, here's something I missed, I want to go over, or here's something I should have emphasized more, and I want to show you this, then they'll be more accepting, they'll be forgiving, and also you're kind of seen as an equal. If you're saying like, oh, I know it all, and don't question me, don't don't question my authority, in a sense, to quote Cartman from South Park, then you're gonna leave people, with a bad taste, thinking they can't question, thinking, that you're not reasonable, mm-hmm. right? So I think that those are important, just because at the end of the day you have to be able to relate to those students, and they shouldn't see you as like up on a pedestal. Like you are a coach, you are a professor. However, it's like they're still human beings at the end of the day, and they want to relate to you. And if you can relate to that person making a mistake, or you can relate to that person maybe not knowing that question or that answer off the top of their head, that's fine. And it also will, as a coach, make you go out and dive into that subject that you're not so comfortable or not so well versed on, you know.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes you keep progressing your game. And there's sometimes things that I show my student, and they're like, "Oh, well, you did this there," and you know, I'm like, I did so many things subconsciously that I don't even realize I'm doing it until a student points it out. Like I'll teach something, and I'm like, "Oh, well, when you were doing that, you put your left hand here." I'm like, "Oh, really? I didn't even see that." So there's a lot of times where you know, I learn from my students, and that sounds like cliche, but it's true, because there's times that I show techniques and I'm like, all right, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're like, well, you might not even notice it, but as you're going from 3 to 4, you're doing this. I'm like, oh, you know what? You're right. And then I add that kind of like tagline on there in a sense. I'm like, okay, from 3 to 4, make sure you like so and so said, make sure you add this in. You know, so being able to learn from your students, and also taking their questions, and then also their criticism too. You know, if they have sometimes criticisms can be valid, right, on certain techniques or certain ways of doing things. So you have to be humble enough to accept that and look at it from a unbiased perspective, and see like if there's really something there, or if you know it's something that they're just. Sometimes students can also just kind of sometimes try to be difficult, to be stubborn on certain techniques, which can be a case too, but you have to kind of like differentiate the two and see like, all right, are they just trying to be difficult here, or are they actually trying to like really understand the move, and really maybe they're running into an issue with the way they're doing it, or their body type.
Yeah, and the thing about jiu-jitsu is like it's always evolving, it's always changing. You know, we're learning new things, we're adding stuff in. I think one of the comments on one of our IG posts was like, oh, jiu-jitsu is like Little League now. It's so, you know, watered down or something, just because we were showing like wrist locks. And I was thinking that's couldn't be further from the truth. Like all of the things that are added into jiu-jitsu or that people are learning only enhance it. You know, jiu-jitsu today is not going to look the same in 30 years. And that's actually one of the reasons why, you know, it kind of draws me in, because it's like, oh, there's always new stuff to learn. There's always new things, you know, you can get better at. There's always new things you can add into your own game. And I think that's important for anything.
No, I agree. I think that's what, I mean, speaking for myself, but I'm sure most other people that have been in jiu-jitsu for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that's what keeps you going back, right? Is that you can't, there's no mastery, right? Or there's no perfect jiu-jitsu, or there's no like end of the road, right? I remember, again, one of the Brazilian coaches I used to train under, he used to say, you know, he's like, if anybody ever tells you they've mastered jiu-jitsu, he's like, they're full of shit.
Yeah.
Like, and it was funny at the time, but it was later on it was proved to be so true, because you know this black belt Jorge Macaco Patino, he was a 4th degree black belt at the time, and he would go home to Brazil and he would learn all these new techniques from his black belts, right? That were much younger than him, that had been training jiu-jitsu maybe half the amount of time, right? So he was, you know, always still learning himself, and that's what keeps you interested too, you know. And there's you know, there's people that, you know, like you said, like, oh, this new jiu-jitsu is watered down. It's like, no, it's just changing, evolving. And there's some people that think like, oh, the way something's been done should always be done this way.
Yeah.
And that's very like, you know, we've talked about fixed mindset.
Yeah.
You know, fixed mindset is you know, something like that, where you have a fixed way of doing things, and it can only be done this way, and it can't change, right? And that's where the evolving stops too. Like, I think from jiu-jitsu, especially with certain like black belts, if you stop training, if you stop going outside your school, your academy to train or compete, you really stop learning.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can only teach what you know, unless you're like going online and you know, watching instructionals and then implementing those things and learning them, you know, as you're training. You have to keep learning, you have to keep progressing, otherwise you get left behind.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't take long, really. Like it's progressing so quickly nowadays, especially with the internet, social media, all your instructionals online. There's so many competitions, there's so much content and so much stuff out there, that if you just train in your school, you just teach your school, you teach the same things the way they've been done since you learned them 10 years ago, you're falling behind, and you're also doing yourself a disservice and your students a disservice too. I remember Macaco used to talk about that too. well, black belts that don't train anymore, they don't compete anymore, they just teach the same things. And it's like, you got to keep evolving. What got you to black belt is the same thing that you need to keep doing, especially if you're an instructor. You have that responsibility to your students to keep learning, keep progressing, and keep adding tools to your tool belt, or even just learning the techniques that are trends. It doesn't mean that you have to do them, but it's good to learn them. It's good to learn defenses to them, right? It's good to learn setups to them. That way you can teach them, and maybe one of your students will, actually work on those techniques or pick up those techniques and go further with them, and that then in return teach you something about the technique that you never would have known.
Yeah, I think that's important, is like the continuation of like always learning and always evolving. And that's important for, and you know this as well as I do, but like, when you're a white belt and you learn something, you could learn the same move at blue belt but see different details. You could learn the same thing at purple belt and understand it in a different way. And that kind of translates, through the years, because as you learn jiu-jitsu and as you understand the mechanics of it and the way your body moves, you can sense different things, you can feel different things. And I always tell people, like, start kind of learning, like, what the other person's gonna do, how your body moves, patience. Patience is really important. And I think as you progress through the belts, that's probably the one thing that kind of differentiates them, right? Because when you're a white belt, you're like, go, like, I gotta be fast, I gotta be hard, I gotta win. And when you're a blue belt too, I gotta submit, I gotta get this submission. And then, as I know for me personally, like, as purple belt with 9 years, like, I can kind of feel things more, so I can, find places to kind of be patient and calm, feel the other person's movement, and then capitalize on that. So it's like an energy game. I'm learning how to save my energy and use the other person's energy. But if I didn't have that patience, I would never, accomplish that or get to that.
Yeah, patience is huge, and energy expenditure is a big thing too. One of my, we were actually watching, was it EBI
Combat Jiu-Jitsu, yeah.
Combat Team Duel last night, which my good buddy Brandon McCaffrey was commentating on, and he has this thing. He's telling me this is like, whenever we slap hands and bump fists, he's like you're signing a social or verbal contract to do all the work, and I'm gonna capitalize on that. So in other words, making that other person carry your body weight, making that other person do all the extra work, and really you just using your weight, using your pressure, and making them do the hard, heavy lifting in a sense. And that takes time to learn, but it pays off dividends, especially, later in the round or later in the competition. It pays off when you didn't use as much energy, and that person on bottom is using maximum amount of energy and also holding your body weight, or having to move your weight the entire time. And patience, then patience is huge too. I can't remember how many countless times I've lost positions or submissions or even competitions, just lack of patience. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I think that's a virtue that everyone struggles with outside of jiu-jitsu, but especially in jiu-jitsu, you often get excited. I remember one time having one of my friends back, and I had his back, and I didn't realize how like heavy I was breathing, how excited I was getting, but I was like, I don't get this guy's back off. I really want to finish. In my head, that's probably what I was thinking, but I was like, he even told me, I was like, hey man, he's like, as I had his back, he's like, take it down a notch, relax. I'm like, all right, I didn't realize how heavy I was breathing. But that happens too. It's like you get to a position or a point where like, oh, I'm gonna get this person. Like I can see it, or I can get to a position where I'm getting to a position where I can attack, right? And so that often happens, and it happens the same on the flip side when you're defending and someone's smashing you and you're out of breath and your heart rate's getting elevated, your everything's just on like extreme alert, right? And so those times you have to like go through a checklist too. Like my first instructor was a blue belt, and he used to tell us like, you're gonna have those times, he's like, when you're getting smashed, it's uncomfortable, you can't breathe right, and it just sucks. But he's like, go through a checklist, like go through of your body, and like see like what's in danger. Like, go, is it your neck? Is it getting choked? Right? No. Okay, cool. Right? How are my arms? Are my arms getting attacked? Is there any arm locks, any shoulder locks, wrist locks? No. All right, cool. Now my legs, are my legs safe? Is there any attacks going on my ankles, my knees, what have you? And he's like, if you've gone through that checklist and know that everything's not getting in the middle of getting submitted, just like tell yourself to breathe, relax, calm down. Know that it does suck. Yeah, you want to get out of there, but you're not getting submitted. There's many times I think people, especially in the beginning, it takes a little time to get used to it. People will tap just to get out of a position. Yeah. Right? I understand claustrophobia. Maybe you had some past traumas, things like that. That's understandable. However, sometimes you need to be in it, and you need to be able to not just stay there, but able to find a way to escape, find a way to relax, find a way to breathe, and be patient with it. Because there's times that, aside from just tapping, you're not going to be able to get out of that position, or they don't want you to get out of that position, right? They're going to make you stay there and suffer.
They're going to cook you.
And cook you, right? Cooking the beans, like the Brazilians used to say. And that goes back to the patience on top too, like learning how to cook somebody and wear them down, and to where they almost give you the submission. Like, and that can happen. It takes time. It takes patience, and a lot of times we want to go for it right away. And I'd much rather, my game personally, I'd much rather go slower, pressure, cook the person, make them very tired, make them very exhausted, make them frustrated, and make them give me the submission. It's much easier. And again, back to the energy consumption, it takes much less energy from me, and it zaps more energy from them.
Yeah, it made me think about after I had ACL surgery in 2020, and then when I first started training again, it was kind of like being a white belt all over again, even at purple belt, because one of the things that I wasn't used to anymore was being in danger, or like being underneath someone. And I can just remember like somebody being on mount and just feeling like I couldn't breathe, like almost panicking, like hyperventilating, like I can't breathe. And it took a while for me to get that kind of like, okay, stop what you're doing, be calm, think this through. You're not in danger. You're okay. Yes, this person's heavy, but panicking is not going to get you out of the situation any faster. And now, like, I kind of look for those opportunities. They say like, do difficult things, right? Because the difficult things are the things that we need to do. We have a pretty nice kind of cushy life here, and like we don't have to do a lot of hard things. So putting ourselves into those situations where our body's kind of going through a fight or flight, or our body's like starts panicking, shortness of breath, and learning how to breathe through those and calm yourself down. Those are very, very important things that translate through, not just through jiu-jitsu, but through everything in your life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's very few times you're going to be as uncomfortable, as tired, as mentally and physically exhausted as you are going to be in jiu-jitsu. It definitely, translates to it, because it's like, it just makes life easier. If once, you've trained and you've gotten that like anxiety, aggression, stress, and all those things out, and you've been, especially if you go like some hard rounds where maybe someone put you in very uncomfortable situations, or put you in, very tight submissions, and you've been able to escape those, it gives you some sort of like euphoric sense afterwards. It's like where you have just less worries, less stress, and you feel good, right? You just feel good after exerting all that energy, and being able to just focus on that one thing. And that for me is big too, is just like being able to come in and just focus on the person in front of you, what you're doing, and not worrying about the stress from work, relationships, finances, what have you. You have that short finite time on the mat, especially when you're rolling it, it's a shorter period of time that you're going to be able to just to focus and kind of get in that flow state, in a sense, if you can get to that point.
Yeah, it made me think of two different things. There's a really like well-known CrossFitter that does jiu-jitsu now, and they asked him about the difference, and he said the difference is, when you're like lifting a barbell, the barbell's not trying to fight you back, right? It's not trying to smother you. It's not trying to grapple with you. And it really makes me think, because like I think one of the other comments that we got on one of our YouTube videos was talking about like martial artists and how like how in prison they're like the weakest, and I was thinking, I've seen other martial arts, like, you know, my son has done, you know, taekwondo and things, and I can say that there's not a lot of things like jiu-jitsu and wrestling and grappling where we're not standing at a distance. We're not standing at, you know, arm's length or legs length away. Like, somebody is physically on top of you trying to, you know, hurt you or trying to submit you, or it's a very like realistic idea of what it feels like to fight somebody off of you. And honestly, a lot of people, like, when they come and they try it, like, that's the one thing they don't like. They don't like that closeness, that physicality. They don't like somebody being on top of them. I can tell you, like, even with coaching kids and adults, like, when they're new and they have to go through like mount escapes and they have somebody on them and they can't get them off, like, they panic, because it's a very like real life scenario where if somebody wanted to hold you down, they probably could, and like having to learn how to escape that is it's terrifying for most people.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's like a good important lesson. Usually when I do a first like intro private lesson with somebody and they think they want to learn jiu-jitsu, I always take them through mount escape. And you know, I think it's important for them to like be put in the worst case scenario and see like, all right, how can I escape? Like, and also the ability to not being able to escape is a really big realization. Like, man, if someone bigger, stronger, or perhaps had martial arts experience got on top of me, like, I would be in danger. And sometimes that's a very clear realization that like, I need to learn this and I need to know more. You know, and then sometimes it can unfortunately make them go the other way of, you know, more towards the ego though. Sometimes the ego gets hurt and they realize, like, you know, that, and that's more of a classroom setting, but sometimes you get people in there that you know, go to a classroom and they get their ego hurt and they don't want to get beat, or they don't get submitted again. But that sometimes happens. But just speaking on like on a one-on-one basis, I usually like tell them like, hey, like, we're gonna try this first lesson out. Let's take you in mount. Let's get to the worst case scenario. If someone's on top of you, someone's hitting you, how are you gonna escape? How are you gonna get out of there? Give them a few ways and kind of, you know, build them up from there and show them like, all right, here's worst case scenario. How can I escape? How can I get up? And then eventually get to a point where, you know, you're getting them to the full guard and able to attack, whether it be submissions and sweeps, you know, showing them different things like that. But back to like the kind of being used to being grabbed and strangled and thrown around and whatnot. I was listening to a podcast a while back, and there was this cop from a bad area, a bad, you know, city with a lot of crime, very crime ridden, and he was a long time martial artist, black belt, maybe been an MMA fighter. But anyways, he was telling he was telling like why he was able to handle so many different situations where things went bad, you know, and out in the streets. And he was saying, I was accustomed to violence. He's like, I've been accustomed to violence for 10 plus years because he's a black belt, because he had done some MMA fighting and, you know, just been used to being grabbed, thrown, choked, you know, hit, you know, et cetera, right? So once you get used to that and you're doing it day in, day out, day basis, you know, it's much easier to deal with if you were to come across it in the streets, right? Obviously, law enforcement, they're going to come across it way more often than a regular civilian. But either way, you're used to someone grabbing, you're used to that force, that pressure, that uncomfortableness, right, of being grabbed or being choked or being thrown or being slammed or having weight put on top of you. And it's like when someone hasn't experienced that, it's a real culture shock, right? I mean, it's like we obviously seen kids that, you know, cry or get upset or just can't handle it. But I've seen adults do the same. You know, I've seen adults get into those situations and they just, you know, panic or they freak out or, you know, what have you. And it's, but it's, I think even if they don't stick with it, at least you got the reality check, you know. even if you don't say like, oh, this is something I need to train in this and learn this, at least you know, got baptized in a sense, you know.
Yeah, I feel like even with the kids, you know, one of the things that I do with them is, you know, we get used to kind of like pairing them up with like somebody their own size or their own strength. But every once in a while, I have like a smaller child go with a bigger child, because I believe like as a smaller female, like it's important to fill those strength discrepancies. So, you know, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time where, you know, I've been the only woman in the room, or I have trained with, you know, at predominantly male schools. And so I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to train with somebody that is stronger than you, bigger than you, you know, outweighs you by, you know, 50 plus pounds. And I think for us, like for our students, it's so important for them to learn that, for them to feel that. Because, and I, like what I tell the kids, you know, if a bully like decides to pick on you at school, probably not going to be smaller than you. He's probably going to be like bigger than you. And so you need to learn that, you know, the things that you learn in here are going to work on somebody that's bigger and stronger than you.
Yeah, it's very true. Like if you're always training with a kid your size, or maybe even a kid a little smaller, it's going to be a rude awakening when a kid bigger than you grabs you and is stronger, right?
Yeah.
Not saying your techniques won't work. However, there's times you have to adjust and the way you do certain techniques, or you have certain techniques that will work on a smaller person that won't work on a bigger person, right? So it's one of those things, you need to train with different body types, but especially someone that is bigger than you, for the self-defense aspect of it, right? It's very important across the board for male and kids, but especially females too, because, you know, it's like, it's 9.999 times out of 10 that a male is going to attack you and not a female, right? And it's, you know, a lot of females say, I want to train with females, I want to train with males, and I get the, like, you know, the comfortability and also the not being hurt. However, if you only train with females and then a man comes and grabs you, you're gonna like, I've never felt this type of strength before. I never felt this type of size before. So it's important to have male training partners that, you know, obviously take care of you and that don't hurt you and that are able to work with you, but you know, at the same time still give you like realistic pressure, realistic strength, and you know, that way you can adjust accordingly and say, okay, this technique doesn't work on Bob over here because he's much bigger than me and stronger than me, but Susie, I can use this technique on because she's relatively my size and maybe a little smaller. Okay, so it's going to give you a realistic perspective, what works, what doesn't work, and you're going to have a better like set curriculum or set techniques that you can use on bigger people.
Mm-hmm. And that excludes people that can't train with other genders for religious.
Yeah, I understand that religious exemptions and things like that. However, I think the majority of people that do those things,
it's a comfort thing.
It's usually a comfort thing, or it can be that they don't want to challenge themselves thing too. You know, because again, it's like aside from like the religious exemptions and, you know, comfortability, it's again like, all right, if you're doing this for self-defense, and you don't train with men, then what are we doing? You know, I mean, it's just one of those things, like, because like you said, if you train with the 100-pound females and you're 100 pounds,
you're not gonna ever feel what that strength is like.
Yeah, and you 200-pound man grabs you. How are you gonna realistically tell yourself like this technique's gonna work against him? Because I've only done it with this 100-pound female, right? So eventually, you need to train with someone that's bigger. Otherwise, you really don't know. You may think you know, but again, it's a different ball. And it's the same thing with me. Just like I can do stuff with smaller 150-pound guys that I can't do with guys that are 200 pounds and especially above me. You know, so there's certain techniques that I don't do with guys my size or guys way bigger because I know better, because I've done it and I've gotten smashed. I've gotten put in really bad positions. I don't do that on him, but maybe a guy smaller, I'll do it. You know, and it's just like, or you maybe still do the same technique, but you change it. You know, you do it in a different way, because, you know, size does matter, and there's a reason there's weight classes, right? And I mean, there's very few people in the world that that size doesn't matter, right? And even then, it's like at a certain point it does.
Yeah.
And there's a reason there's so many weight classes in boxing and MMA and jiu-jitsu. You know, it's weight and size, it does take effect, especially over time, you know, in a longer duration. And with a self-defense situation, you know, it's, you don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know how long you're going to be there. And it's like, I've heard this more and more with, you know, call times for law enforcement. It's like, what's the arrival time of them getting there? It's not 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, some cities you're probably looking at, you know, 20, 30, minutes, maybe even longer.
Yeah.
So it's like that weight and that strength is going to wear on you over time. And so you need to be able to learn how to train with those people and what techniques work and don't work, but also learn how, like we talked about earlier about energy management, how much more that bigger person is going to suck the energy in. I mean, how much more exhausting it's going to be rolling with that person that's 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds heavier.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is, you know, when I have a kid who knows, you know, takedowns, but they may be a little bit bigger than the person they're doing takedown rounds with, so they like to swing them around because they know they're going to fall. Yeah. And so immediately what I do is I put them with a larger opponent that they cannot swing around, just to prove that, like, you know, that's not a legit technique. It's not. It may work on somebody smaller than you. It's not going to work on somebody bigger than you. So let's go back to, like, you know, working our techniques and things that actually work. Because especially with kids, like, they're just so competitive. They're like, I'm going to get this takedown, you know, no matter what. I'm just going to swing this person around until they fall.
Yeah, there's techniques like that too. I think at one time, in particular, like back to the energy consumption it takes to compete or train with someone bigger. I did a one competition with absolute was first. For whatever reason, it was weird. So I did absolute first, and then I had my regular divisions, and I was exhausted.
Yeah.
My arms were gassed.
Yeah.
I think I placed third, but I went against at least one guy that was, I don't know, 50 plus 50, 75 pounds heavier than me. And it used so much of my energy and so much, so much lactic acid buildup. Mm-hmm. And I remember the rest of the day I had 2 more divisions and I was exhausted every match. So it does make it more difficult, you know. So it's one of those things. And, you know, of course we have people on YouTube like, well, why do you only use her? She's just a small female. Like, well, she's my business partner and we have a similar schedule. It's not easy to get guys my size or during my students during the middle of the day to do filming. So therefore, I use her for everything. We could use bigger people, but again, it's just honestly scheduling. It just makes it easier.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Nogi Pans, and I did absolute, and I'm a lightweight, so I think I had my matches were against super heavyweight, and during, you know, it felt okay, like everything didn't feel like extremely hard, but I remember the next day I was just sore in places I have never been sore, and it really made me realize, like, the power and energy exertion you have to use to hold somebody down that's a lot bigger than you is astronomical. So I'm definitely glad Absolute's at the end of the competition and not at the beginning.
Yeah, that was the one time I did it for that competition. I don't know if they still do it that way, but man, it was, like I said, it was tough. I like the Absolutes. I do like the going against the bigger guys, because I feel like, you know, you can use like speed as your advantage. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's some big guys that move out there move pretty quick too. However, most time you can use like speed to your advantage. You can you know, escape certain situations fairly quickly if they don't, you know, set the weight, set the pressure. Yeah. So I've always enjoyed going bigger. Even when I was small, now I'm 195, 200 pounds. I used to be 170 pounds. And even then I enjoyed going with bigger guys, because I was always somewhat strong. Yeah. But I liked using the ability to be fast and quick, and, you know, get to positions like, you know, the back or mount or things like that, to where I can implement my game and try to you know, get on top, stay on top, and try to find a way to submit them. But And it's also a thing too, like I feel like with absolute, if you're the smaller person, it's like, you know,
there's no expectation.
There's no expectation.
Yeah.
There's no pressure on you. So it's like, if you go out there and, you know, David versus Goliath, you beat Goliath, right? Then it's like, it's even more fun. It's even more rewarding. You know, it's even like, wow, that person was X amount of pounds smaller, and you know they still submitted it.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's fun too. Like I like going with bigger, stronger people just because, you know, as far as like strength, like I don't have to hold back as much, or you know, you can do things that you wouldn't normally do, which is fun for me. Okay, so if you had to tell anyone like that is not yet doing jiu-jitsu, that's maybe thinking about doing jiu-jitsu or is wanting to start, what would you say are kind of like your tips or, you know, tricks or, you know, things to kind of get motivated to do it?
The motivation part is kind of hard. I would say if you're already thinking about it, you obviously have some interest in it, right? So to get motivated, I mean, that can be difficult because motivation can be different for different people. However, I would say honestly, like if you're already thinking about it and you're like looking to get motivated, just motivated, I would say going online and viewing, and there's so many like highlight reels and competitions, and I think looking at those to me is very motivating. Like even me as someone who's been training jiu-jitsu for a long time, it's like I'll go on YouTube and go look at like some high level ADCC matches or some highlight reels of certain high level competitors. And to me, that's very motivating to want to train. And I think probably for people that are the layman that don't know any jiu-jitsu but just, you know, have an interest in it and are looking for motivation, like to me that can be very motivating, going down the line and seeing these high level competitors compete and watching them. And then also for me, being someone that's trained a long time, just going online and watching other people talk about jiu-jitsu and the way it's changed their life and the things that it's done for them, that's very motivating as well. But again, motivation can be different for everybody. I think for newer people, I think just sometimes seeing those high-level athletes compete and seeing some spectacular finishes or some spectacular comebacks is very motivating. Or like outside of jiu-jitsu, like in MMA, like you see some really high-level people using jiu-jitsu to win fights, to win championships, and just being able to like completely dominate people with just grappling. Sometimes obviously wrestling, judo, tied in, catch wrestling, I think that can be very motivating too, like seeing someone like Khabib or Charles Oliveira or Hamzat, or like all these guys that have this high level of skill of grappling, you know, obviously along with wrestling, and being able to dominate at such a high level with these grappling martial arts. To me, I think can be motivating as a newer person, because that's all you know or that's all you see. Because most people, even for me, it was true like 10 plus years ago, you start watching UFC, and that's how I would say, at least speaking for males, that's how most males get into it.
Yeah.
They see it, UFC, right? You see some sort of MMA on the TV or watching with your buddies, and you're like, you see some guy strangle some other guy and he wins the whole fight, or he wins the belt, and you're like, man, that's motivating. If that guy can win a UFC heavyweight championship, maybe I can just learn how to do that too.
Yeah.
You know, so motivation, it comes and goes, but I think seeing those things, as for me, speaking for myself, like when I saw it, like that was very motivating. I didn't want to be a UFC champion per se, but it was motivating to learn like, oh, these guys are like ultimate badasses. Like if I can learn a little bit of that, like that to me, to learn that some of that skill set, to me was very motivating.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like females, you know, our community is kind of what keeps us like involved and keeps us, you know, going to jiu-jitsu and trying it out. So like, you know, finding you know, some kind of a women's group, or you know, even if you've never done jiu-jitsu before, like I know we host like monthly women's open mats, and we get a lot of women that have, you know, never never tried jiu-jitsu, but they heard about it, or one of their friends does it, or and so they come in and then they see like, oh wow, there's other women that do jiu-jitsu, other moms, other them and their kids train, like, and so that's very comforting, because motivation, it doesn't last. So understanding your purpose, understanding why you even want to learn this, that's what's really going to kind of keep you coming back whenever times get hard and whenever it seems like a struggle.
Yeah, I think women definitely are much more motivated by community. And I think, seeing women that come to events that never train jiu-jitsu, or they have a friend that trains and they've been talking to them about it, and then they see this large community, they see how welcoming and how nice and how tight-knit a lot of jiu-jitsu communities are. That kind of makes them feel more comfortable and kind of brings them in. And I think men on the other hand, like, they don't necessarily join for that. Maybe they do if they already come from that background, like if they come from sports or military. They've already seen like what that camaraderie, what that community, what that kind of close-knit bond of these like-minded individuals can do for you. So sometimes men will have that motivation in the beginning, but I think a lot of times men get that on after the fact. Like, all right, I want a lot of times motivating factors outside of like watching MMA or UFC can be, I hear with guys that work out a lot, they go to the gym and bored, want to try something new, right? Sometimes that's their motivating factor, and they want to try something new on board, just want to push themselves to the next level. So that's sometimes people's motivating factor. And then when they come in and they train with everyone and they get to be friends, and that community and that like-mindedness is what keeps them coming back, and those friendships you build. That's a lot. Honestly, like, I have students all the time that, like, if they sign up for a class, like, that their other friend's gonna sign up, right? Just because they love training together, they like hanging out with each other. So it's that can be a motivating factor once you're in. It's like you have your best friend that's gonna show up tonight. All right, I'm gonna show up too, right? Or they're gonna sign up for this extra class, or they're gonna go to this seminar, or this whatever this event. It motivates you to go because you enjoy being with that person, hanging out with that person. And then there's another person that likes hanging out with you too, and then it just builds upon that, right? And that's where you get that whole team and everyone doing these things together that are very difficult, that are strenuous, that can be tough at times. However, I feel like having those like-minded friends and individuals do it together makes you stick around.
Anything you want to close with? Any other questions?
Questions? Do I have questions? No, I don't have any questions. No, I think if you're thinking about it, do it. The biggest thing I always hear from people that thought about it for an extended period of time, and they do it, they're like, man, I wish I started at this time, right? And that's everyone that gets the jiu-jitsu bug per se and sticks with it always wishes I would have started at this age, or I would have started at this age, right? And so if you're already thinking about it, do it, right? Just don't wait any longer. Take the leap. Go try a class. At least get out there and try it. And I always tell people too, like, oh, I wish I would have found it at this time. It's like, doesn't mean that was the right time for you, because there's plenty of times where people you come across something and you're not ready for it. Maybe mentally, maybe physically, maybe financially. You never know what the situation may be. Maybe time constraints. So when you found it and you stuck with it, that's the perfect time for you, right? Because you could have found it at 5 years old and did it for a couple of years and then got bored of it and then never visited it again as an adult, and saw the benefits it would bring you as an adult. So I think it's important that whenever you found it and you stuck with it, that was the best time for you. So yeah, my advice would be is if you're thinking about it and you've been thinking about it for an extended period of time, all that time that you were thinking about it, you could have been that much better. Right? And it doesn't matter if it was 6 months, a year, or years. Like, it does take a long time to get good at jiu-jitsu. However, 6 months is a good amount of time. You can improve your game a lot. Or if you're started from baseline, you can learn a lot. 6 months to a year, that's huge. And as amount of techniques and the conditioning you get, the physical, benefits and the mental benefits from training. So I would tell people, like, get into it now, and that way you don't kick yourself in the butt a year down the road or X amount of time down the road because of, like, man, if I would have started then, I would have been this. I tell that sometimes, just messing with them, but students that waited, our friends that waited to get into it, I'm like, hey, if you would have started when I first told you, you'd be a blue belt right now. They're like, damn it, you're right. And I'm like, but again, back to what I was saying, like, sometimes they just weren't ready, However, if you're already thinking about it and you're like, just waiting for no arbitrary reason, go ahead and do it. Jump in, go try a class, and that way you're not telling yourself, a year or whatever amount of time later that, man, I wish I would have started earlier.
Yeah, I feel like time is gonna pass regardless, so you might as well do something. And that's the thing too, like with training, like, sometimes when you sign up, life is gonna happen, and life happens. But if you can still, like, get in and learn, even if it's once a week, even if it's twice a week, you create those habits, and once you break those habits, they're hard to build back. Once you don't do jiu-jitsu for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that fourth week going in is gonna suck all over again. And so, like, if you just kind of keep up with it, even if it's minimal is better than not training at all. Relearning how to breathe and the warm-ups and the rolling, like, all of that, like, relearning it is hard. And so, like, try not to fall off very bad, because it will be a struggle coming back.
I agree. It would be a struggle bus. Yeah, it's tough. Week off, 2 weeks, months off.
Months, years.
Those that have been injured or been out for whatever reason, how that difficult that can be. So yeah, it's one thing you want to do consistently, because you want to improve yourself, but you want to stay consistent to keep those quote unquote gains you've made, and continue to progress and build upon those. Good?
Yeah.
All right, guys, well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.